Danger Dolan. Allcess9870 asks, DD, what are your thoughts on 4th specs? Do you think they might actually add a 4th spec to everyone? Do we need it? Or should some current specs classes get the same overhaul treatment Warlocks got? So it wasn't that long ago that we got that 4th spec Tinker class character sheet, and it turned out to be fake, and that was confirmed by the devs. But what about the idea of 4th specs for all classes? I mean, it may rekindle interest in older classes, like if you got your warrior and it's got a new spec, you might return to the game because, you know, you're invested in that character and you've got a brand new sparkly reason to play. And maybe some of those dream classes we've been thinking about, like Demon Hunter or the Tinker, they could find their way into the game just by being introduced as a spec. Now, Vanian.eu interviewed Tom Chilton about this very topic. Here is what he had to say.
It's definitely an idea that we've considered, adding like a 4th specialization to most of the classes, maybe a 5th for druids or whatever. Right now, it's not something that we're planning to do. We feel like it's already very difficult to keep 3 specializations all being viable and interesting and different from each other. I don't know that we would really improve the game by adding a 4th. You know, I have to imagine that if we added a 4th, we'd run into even more problems of, you know, the mage, you know, whatever the new specialization isn't, you know, interesting and different compared to Fire, Frost, or Arcane. So I think the idea on its surface is very attractive, but the long-term implications for the game probably make it not something that would be good for the game, unless we happen to really identify just the perfect ideas for it, which we haven't yet.
In a separate interview with joystick.com, Ghostcrawler mentions that it would be a huge change for the game and that it might be confusing for players to learn about all these new specs in both PvE and PvP, and that it's not off the table, but by the same token, it's not on the horizon. So they have considered it, they've talked about it, and one day it might make it into the game, but they're not actively working on it is what they're saying. So here are my thoughts. I have previously spoken about the possibility of hero specs, where your character can kind of evolve if he so chooses. And it's more of a cosmetic thing, just like Warlocks in Greenfire, where all of their abilities and their look completely changes. So if DKs were never introduced to the game, you could have your Paladin kind of have a DK spec, and the hero spec's not really more powerful, it's just a different look. But you have to keep in mind that 11 new specs are harder to create than just 3 for a new class. Even if you roll them out over patches, you know, over time, to actually balance them would be absurdly difficult. Not only this, but a new class is more interesting to the consumer. So if you're coming up to someone who's about to buy the expansion and you say, hey, there's this new really awesome class, or you say every old class has a new spec, pretty much every time they're going to choose the new class. I mean, maybe I'm generalizing, but I feel like it's a difference between drinking orange juice and drinking orange flavored water. I just feel like people are going to be more interested in the actual juice, the new class. Whereas the minority will be like, oh man, my old water now tastes a little bit different. Like me personally as a player, I want new specs because it means I get to keep and try something new with my main toon. However, as a designer, I would be talking with the other devs about building an entire expansion around this 1 or 2 new specs per patch deal. But I mean, it's likely just going to be a balancing nightmare, even if by these interviews they just seem unfazed by the actual work involved. And if I had any kind of stock in the company, I'd be saying, no, a new race/class is what sells an expansion. The Cataclysm new race combinations, that was a footnote, and we're afraid that this is going to be the same thing. New specs are just not as interesting as everything else. If Blizzard had a bigger team, I believe they could pull this off. I mean, there is the risk that you upset the player base if you have trouble balancing everything. Although based on how well the Monk introduction went, I think they're getting a grip on what they're doing. If they do announce their 4th spec, I guarantee it's going to happen at BlizzCon, and they're going to outline the rollout over the course of an expansion for each new spec, because I just don't see them building 10 new specs, 11 if you count a druid's 5th, in addition to everything new in the expansion like new leveling zones, new raids, dungeons, etc. So to summarize, I would like to see it, but I am afraid that it's too risky for the company's interests. There might also be some backlash if they cannot balance this properly, and people might cry favoritism if their spec does not get introduced first. That's it for this chat box. If you'd like to see me cover a topic really quick, leave a comment below. Have a good one.